and we will get rolling on it. So chapter 7 has really two accounts at its focus. One of those accounts is cash and cash equivalents, and well, actually three accounts. I apologize for misspeaking. Cash and cash equivalents is one, accounts receivable is another, and then finally we're going to look at notes receivable. So these are some general classifications put into a tabular format about things that are close to cash, or things that you might, confuse, may think, oh, it's cash, but it's actually something else. So, just kind of looking at this briefly, some of it is pretty self-explanatory, and I won't, belabor it, because like I said, I got a lot of stuff to go through today. If it's cash, right, paper currency, and this actually extends into, if you also read the verbiage below that, coin and currency, any bank deposits that include checking and savings accounts. So it doesn't have to be in, it doesn't have to be in the till, in the register. If I have a checking account, if the business checking account, that's cash. A savings account for the business, that's cash. Any non-negotiable instruments, right? If you are living in an apartment, they ask for a cashier's check. Personal checks, right? Money orders, bank drafts. One thing that I will add to the personal checks is that they have to, the date of the check has to, so basically, if I have a check today, but it's dated July the 4th, that is not cash yet. That would be a receivable. If the check has today's date on it, then it's cash. So, right, because it's just about being able to access it. Money orders, bank drafts. So all the electronic, funds that are being sent, electronic transfers, anything like that, non-negotiable, it's cash. Petty cash, money market funds with check cashing privileges. What is a money market fund? It is, it's like a savings account. It tends to be a little bit, they can be more liquid than a savings account. Like if you have a savings account at a bank, you'll start getting charged if you start making too many withdrawals from it, if you start treating it like it's liquid to you. Because the point of the savings account is to hold it, invest it, let it grow. Money market fund is almost like a hybrid between a checking account and a savings account. It certainly earns more money than a checking account, more interest than a checking account would. And they come in two versions. Like there's money markets where money market accounts where you can cash checks. And so you can draw on it as if it were a checking account. In that case, this is a cash designation. And these guys are just cash. These do not include cash equivalents. Because remember, the first line of the balance sheet, current assets, is cash and cash equivalents. So it includes all of this stuff plus anything that we would classify as a cash equivalent. We've talked a bit about restricted cash, but to just, refresh, remember, on the balance sheet, when we list cash and cash equivalents, these are only amounts that are free and clear, that have no legal restrictions. And if it is a material amount, and we remember the meaning of the word material means, substantial or relevant. So if it is a large sum of money compared to the rest of what the rest of the cash that's left. Like if I'm talking about, I have $100 of cash and cash equivalents and $20 is restricted. That's pretty material. That's 20% of all of my cash. If that's restricted, and any amount that is legally restricted needs to be reported as restricted cash. If it's a current asset, it's called restricted cash. So if we're thinking about a balance sheet and we have our current assets section, which is at the top because they're the most liquid, we got cash and cash equivalents. And just going with that idea, like, well, I had $100 and 20 of it's restricted, then I would only report 80 here as the amount that is my most liquid asset. Now, depending on the nature of the restriction, if the restriction is going to last beyond a year, if it is longer than an operating cycle, then we have a long-term investment account called restricted cash. Because we are not going to have the ability to access that cash in the current year. It's going to be beyond that year, so it has to be long-term. That's the non-current asset version of it. Now, if these restrictions are going to expire within the year, then we put the restricted cash up here, and it can be even listed as more liquid than a short-term investment or marketable security, because it's already in its primary form. It's in cash. It just has some restrictions that are barring us from spending it, using it. If there are restrictions, but they're not legal, or there are restrictions, but they're immaterial, then we don't have to recognize it separately. So this designation, either here or here, this is a recognition threshold. Recognition means that I am changing the numbers on the financial statements, the accounts, how the accounts appear on the financial statements. In this case, instead of listing $100 of cash and cash equivalents, I only had 80 and then had 20 set aside either here or here, depending. And just to write that up there so that, it's pretty clear, $100 cash with $20 legally restricted. Now, if this weren't a legal restriction, then I would not have to do this sort of separate recognition. I could put all 100 in cash and cash equivalents. I would just have to disclose it, and disclosure is not as rigorous of a threshold. When we talk about disclosing things, we're putting them in the footnotes. So a couple of things to take away here. Yes, we are revisiting what restricted cash indicates, how it's recognized, but also, and we, it was in the notes for chapter 3, but there's a difference. Typically, if we're being extremely technical, when we say we recognize something, that means that we're changing the financial statements, either how it's organized, how it's listed, or the numbers quantitatively, what numbers we report. When we just disclose something, that doesn't necessarily mean financial statement changes. It more technically means we're altering footnotes to the financial statements. And, the reason why there's a sort of difference in relevance is, if you think about an annual report could be up to 100 pages long. And there are, 5-6 pages dedicated to financial statements. And those are the highlight. Those are the, the short read, the Cliff's notes, the study guide to this company's financial health. The footnotes are, tend to go anywhere between like 40 and 60 pages. That's for digging into details. So when we really want to signal something strongly, we put it in financial statements. When we know something is important and don't feel like it necessarily needs to take center stage, then it can go into the footnotes. Okay, so that's cash. Let's talk briefly about cash equivalents. Now, one of the things that cash equivalents that people get a little bit confused about is, I call it short-term paper here, but really, I mean, it is just a short-term investment. And they can be cash equivalents. This is any maturity with, any investment with an original maturity of less than 3 months, which means that when I give my money to or sink it into a treasury bill, or let another company borrow it, or let one of my executive officers borrow money, I'm going to get the money back within 3 months, right? So that original maturity has to be very short. Short-term investments, also marketable securities. As I called them down at the bottom. The short-term investments or marketable securities are investments with original maturities. And actually I need to cross that word original out. They're not original. They're just investments with maturities within 12 months, i.e. they have current assets. So these might have an original maturity of 6 months. These might have had an original maturity of 5 years, but if it was 4 years ago that I lent the money and I'm going to get it now within a year, it becomes a short-term investment. But one thing to underscore is that short-term investments, anything with an original maturity beyond 3 months, never become cash equivalents. It has to meet this criteria at the outset with its original maturity in order to ever be a cash equivalent. And so all these short-term investments have original maturities greater than 3 months. Other cash equivalents, some items, why are we so concerned of that original maturity being so small? It's because we want to make sure that the interest rate risk is minimal and there's insignificant risk that is going to happen to the value of this investment if interest rates were to change and affect the price of that investment. Even with a full 100 basis point shift, a full 1% change in an annual interest rate, if the investment has less than 3 months to maturity, it's not going to change the value of that investment to a significant amount. And so that is the concern. Readily convertible to known amounts of money and known amounts of, readily convertible is the first criteria. I can sell it off, I can get it back, and at known amounts. There's not this uncertainty that interest rates can embed in the value of what I'm going to get back. And just some common examples of these sorts of investments or other cash equivalents: treasury bills. So that is government loans, right? Loans we make to the government, and then we get our money back from the government. Whether that's federal, state, or local, there's tons of different sort of, municipal bonds, treasury bills, etc. Commercial paper, this is just intercompany loans. So they've, kind of like commercial real estate is structures built for companies. Commercial paper is loans that are initiated between companies. So one company might loan another company $1 million and need to be paid back within 3 months. They're very short term in nature. They can be, anywhere from 90 to 180 days, but they don't tend to be beyond a year ever. It's just sort of short term liquidity, borrowing from other companies. Money market funds without check cashing privileges. So there is a distinction between money market funds with check cashing privileges and those without. Those without are one step away from that liquidity bar that we have for pure cash, but these are a cash equivalent. And in terms of how they're listed on the balance sheet, there wouldn't be a distinction because we list cash and cash equivalents together. There might be, additional disclosure in the footnote though. There are also some receivable items. So these are not cash. These do not belong in cash and cash equivalents. They're neither cash nor cash equivalents. And we got post-dated checks. That was that reference that I made, that in order to be cash, a personal check, the date of the check has to have passed or be the present day. If I'm getting a check on July the 4th, that's dated July the 4th, then it's a receivable until July the 4th, and then it becomes cash. We can give travel advances to our employees. That would be a sort of a receivable. And it's a receivable if we're going to deduct it from the employee's salary. So in that case, what we're doing is we give a salary advance to employee. And when that happens, what we're setting up becomes just a non-trade receivable. And we'll talk about that distinction between trade receivables and non-trade receivables. But we would give them the cash. So we credit cash, we debit a non-trade receivable. That is also an asset. It's a current asset, because what we're going to do then is in the future, when the employee gets paid, we're going to take it away from the amount of pay that we owe them. If we just go ahead and pay for the expense itself, if the company just goes ahead and buys into that, then it's a prepaid travel expense instead, and will be expensed when the employee takes the trip. But these are just, these aren't things that you necessarily have to, oh, okay, let me learn this, memorize this one journal entry. I write these up just so you get a little comfortable, moving outside the realm of a journal entry that you've made 500 times, and debit cost of goods sold, credit inventory, debit cash, credit accounts receivable. You have to think of these things a little more generally and understand, oh, okay, maybe I haven't seen this word before or seen non-trade in front of receivable, but it's just another type of asset. it makes sense that I'm giving some cash out. If I'm recording a receivable, that means I'm getting some cash in the future. Over here, I've only seen prepaid insurance, right? That's all I've ever seen. Well, this is just another type of prepaid, right? So I'm, instead of prepaying insurance expense, I'm prepaying my employee's travel expense. I'm fronting the cash, but until the trip actually happens, until that travel is actually undertaken, then it'll remain as an expense. And yeah, and in this case, right, this is when the company's not getting anything back, right? This is like when you send your employees off to a conference, and that's just part of their training, basically. If you have an overdraft, if you're like my college days, and when I never paid attention to how much money was in my account, very bad idea. If you have basically it's a negative account balance, and it depends whether or not you have, some sort of a compensating balance. For example, if you have it linked, sometimes you can link another account like your savings account. And if you write a check, but your checking account can't cover the amount, the bank will automatically draft over savings to protect it. Then then it is just a credit to cash. If they're offset, credited against the cash account, if cash is available in another account at the same bank. But if you write a check and do not have a compensating balance, there's no compensating balance available, then you have a current liability. You have a liability because then you have to, it would consist of the amount of money you owe plus the fee for not having available funds. So that's the first part, is just classifying what a cash item is, what a cash equivalent is. It involves some new terminology. You'll see it in the assignments. You should just start getting familiar with this stuff. Look up commercial paper in Google. You'll get you'll get Investopedia, no doubt. Treasury bills, things, get curious. That's part of being a student, is just being curious and finding out things about whatever discipline, obviously in this case, either banking, finance, or accounting. These are all going to be driving things. And when someone says commercial paper, you don't want to just sort of nod your head and not know what they mean. Either you should know what it means, or at that moment you have to have the courage to admit you don't know and just ask the question. And I know how long it took me to get over that fear of asking a question when I didn't know something, because I was always so concerned people wouldn't think I was intelligent. I'll give you a hint. The most intelligent people tend to ask the most questions, because if they don't know something, they won't not know it for long. So get curious. So I'm going to halt this piece here, and we'll talk about bank reconciliation.